So look at Anthony Ryder from South Lyon, Michigan, recently selected as the Lions 2020 Fan of the Year. He has a passion about sports broadcasting.
With the 112th selection in the 2021 NFL Draft, the Detroit Lions select Amon-Ra St. Brown, wide receiver, USC. One pride, baby! Yeah! With the NFL Draft fastly approaching for the Detroit Lions, Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell have a decision to make. What are they going to do with the 29th overall selection in the 2024 NFL Draft? Do they spend it on a cornerback like a lot of people want? Do they spend it on an edge rusher? Do they move to the offensive line and kind of set it up for long-term future successes on the interior? What is the move and what do they do to maximize the value of pick 29? Well, today, I'm going to make the argument that 29th overall pick should actually be a wide receiver for the Detroit Lions, not a cornerback, not a defensive lineman, not an offensive lineman, but a wide receiver and a pass catcher to pair with this core, help out Jared Goff, and put the Detroit Lions offense even farther ahead than they already are from the rest of the league. So with that being said, let's take a look at the Detroit Lions offseason so far in regards to wide receiver. Now, yesterday we talked a lot about how the Detroit Lions have interviewed 4 wide receivers at the Combine and for official top 30 visits. Those wide receivers include Xavier Legette from South Carolina, Brian Thomas Jr. from LSU, Devontae Walker from North Carolina, as well as Anthony Gould from Oregon State. Now, Brad Holmes has always had a very specific archetype that he likes for his wide receivers. You got to be big, you got to be fast, you have to stretch the field, and you have to be able to play physical. That fits 3 of these 4 players. Xavier Legette is 6'1", almost 200 pounds. Brian Thomas is almost 6'5", 200 pounds. And Devontae Walker, despite being a little bit skinnier, is well over 6'3". All of these wide receivers have a 9.5 plus RAS score under their belts, meaning they are extreme athletes. They are very well sized for the Brad Holmes system, and they are very much targets to what Brad Holmes has historically liked in the past. Now, Anthony Gould is a wide receiver projected to go late in the 7th round to an undrafted player. Could be a player that the Lions potentially like, but I do not believe he is necessarily relevant to this case. I just wanted to put out there that they have interviewed up to 4 wide receivers at this point, and it is very likely that they will be interviewing several more. Now, the Detroit Lions a couple of weeks ago also suffered a loss from the roster as Josh Reynolds, the 2.5-year wide receiver, longtime security blanket for Jared Goff, has officially left for the Mile High City. The Denver Broncos offered Josh Reynolds a 2-year, $14 million contract, and although there was some speculation that Josh Reynolds left due to some personal issues, it seems as though it was simply a money factor. But regardless, the security blanket for quarterback 1 is no longer there, leaving the Detroit Lions roster looking a little bit like this, with Amon-Ra St. Brown being well and above the wide receiver 1, putting up over 1,500 yards in his first all-pro selection a season ago. Jameson Williams, the former first-round selection from the University of Alabama, who is expected to have a breakout season in year 3. Donovan Peoples-Jones, a recently traded for wide receiver from the Cleveland Browns that Brad Holmes spent a 6th-round pick to acquire last offseason at the trade deadline, as well as re-signing him to a 1-year, $2 million deal. Khalif Raymond, the longtime kick and punt returner for the Detroit Lions, as well as a solid wide receiver 4 option who had over 200 yards and a number of touchdowns last year, as well as former 7th-round pick Antoine Green from the University of North Carolina, who also happens to stand well over 6'1" with 4'4" speed. As you can see with the roster, Brad Holmes likes big players, he likes fast players, and he likes players that can stretch the field. So with that being said, what do the wide receiver 1s look like in this class, and what players could the Lions potentially be targeting at pick 29? Well, a couple of the first-round wide receivers we're going to talk about. Obviously, the ones that likely won't be there without a trade-up are Marvin Harrison Jr., who is expected to go within the top 5, Malik Neighbors, who is expected to go within the top 10, and Rome Odunze, who is expected to go right around there between the 10 and 12th overall selection. But a couple of players you might not know about, or a couple of players that aren't expected to go nearly as early, include Troy Franklin, the wide receiver from Oregon, who last season put up over 1,300 yards and 14 touchdowns off 81 receptions. A.D. Mitchell, who put up nearly 900 yards last season, despite not having nearly as many targets, as well as some quarterback competency issues at the University of Texas. Keon Coleman, the wide receiver from Florida State, who very much fits the Brad Holm mantra of big, physical wide receiver down the field. You have Xavier Worthy, a wide receiver from Texas that broke the 40-yard dash record on top of being arguably the most explosive player in this class, as well as potentially Xavier Legette, a player that the Lions have actually interviewed and brought in for a couple of interviews and brought him for some more in-depth questioning. The wide receiver from South Carolina, who is a little bit raw for sure, but definitely has the talent to be a number one wide receiver in the NFL. So with that being said, why should the Detroit Lions draft a wide receiver? Why is wide receiver the best option at 29? What wide receiver would potentially be the best fit? Well, personally, I think when you look at the rest of the roster, wide receiver is by far the weakest position on the roster as of right now. And despite the rumors that the Detroit Lions are going or potentially interested in signing free agent wide receiver Tyler Boyd, that is not only yet to be actually come to fruition, right? Tyler Boyd is still a free agent, as well as the fact that looking at the wide receiving core, they are currently only 5 deep, and over the last couple of seasons have carried at least 6 into week 1, as of course, while having several others on the practice squad throughout the preseason. So their wide receiving room is incredibly thin, and there really isn't a great wide receiver free agency left out there, right? Tyler Boyd is probably your best option from Cincinnati, and even then, he is more of a slot wide receiver on the older end and on the wrong side of 30, and a player that is not going to be a long-term option, nor is he going to come in and put up the kind of numbers or success that the Lions need out of a wide receiver one next season. So with that being said, you look at the offensive line, it is one of the best units across the NFL. You have obviously Taylor Decker, Graham Glasgow, Frank Ragnow, Kevin Zeitler, as well as Penei Sewell across the starting line. And then you have Coyote Awaska and Colby Sorsdale as your backup guards, while Dan Skipper is your backup tackle. And while I do think that backup tackle and backup interior offensive linemen very well will be addressed in this draft class, I don't think it's going to be at pick number 29. I don't think the value is quite there at 29 for the tackles, as some of the big tackles will likely be off the board. And although I do think a player like Jackson Powers Johnson could be on the board if he falls to 29, that seems increasingly unlikely, and I don't think the Lions are going to take a guard that early with the guard depth and the interior offensive line depth throughout the remainder of this draft. So offensive line is out of the way, and then the other big one is cornerback, right? The Lions had the 27th ranked secondary a season ago, and even though they brought in Carlton Davis via trade, even though they brought in Amik Robertson, even though they re-signed Kendall Vildor as well as Emmanuel Mosley, even though they have revamped this secondary and reinvented this cornerback room, there is still some room for improvement. Carlton Davis, I think, is a really good cornerback one for them, but cornerback 2 is still out and still yet to be seen. Emmanuel Mosley could be that guy, but coming off of back-to-back torn ACLs, how much faith are you going to put in him to be healthy for an entire season? Amik Robertson had a pretty good year with the Raiders last year, but is a 5'9" cornerback that you may not trust on the boundary versus some bigger, more physical wide receivers. And considering the Lions are playing some of those big physical wide receivers, guys like DJ Moore, guys like Christian Watson twice a year, having a player giving up over 7 inches on them and several pounds may not be the best option for that either. Meaning cornerback could very much be an option. However, much like many years, I believe this will be the year that Brad Holmes surprises players and surprises teams by not taking a cornerback early, right? In his first draft, everybody wanted a wide receiver in round 1. They waited until round 4. Everybody wanted a quarterback in year 2. Brad Holmes didn't get a quarterback at all and didn't end up getting one until the 3rd round of the following draft class. Everybody wanted a pass rusher. Didn't go until the 6th round in James Houston, of course, after Aiden Hutchinson, but still the case is to be made. Everybody wanted a safety really early. They waited till the 3rd round to get Kirby Joseph. And this year, with everybody wanting a cornerback, and with there being some pretty good cornerback depth on day 2, I think this will be the year that Brad Holmes passes on Kool-Aid McKinstry, passes on Teron Arnold, passes on Quinyon Mitchell, passes on Nate Wiggins for a potential round 2 guy such as TJ Tampa or Kyrie Jackson or Jarian Jones, a player that can play on the boundary, a player that potentially might even start on week 1, but a player you don't need to spend top first round quality draft picks on. So with that being said, you then ask, well, what about the edge rushing position? And the edge rushing position, once again, I think will be depleted by the time the 29th pick comes around. Dallas Turner is not making it to 29. Jared Verse is not making it to 29. Leatu Latu is not making it to 29. And quite personally, I don't think Chop Robinson is going to either be at 29, and I don't think he's necessarily the type of player that they are looking at. More likely, they are going to potentially trade out of 29 to get both an edge rusher and a pass rusher and a cornerback. But again, this could be the year where they want to wait till the second round. Go with Darius Robinson in the second. Go with Braylon Trice in the second. Go with Chris Braswell in the second. With Adisa Isaac in the second. Maybe even wait for Marshawn Nealon in the third. There are a lot of edge rushers and a ton of talented defensive linemen in this class. Whereas with the wide receivers, of course, it is a very deep class. But I think after these first 6, 7, 8 guys, you're really getting into more role players, and you're really starting to move away from the quality wide receiver ones that you can get in the first round. Now, my personal pick for this and my personal favorite player from this list is going to be Adonai Mitchell, wide receiver from Texas that is 6'4", nearly 200 pounds, ran a 4.3 440-yard dash, runs every single route in the book to a T, is in my opinion the best route runner and the most fluid mover in this draft class, and I think he will be a star in the NFL. But again, you can take anybody from this list. Outside of the big three, there's a possibility that A.D. Mitchell's at 29. There's a possibility that Keon Coleman's at 29. There's a possibility that Troy Franklin is at 29 or Xavier Legette is at 29. And with that being the case, the wide receiving core could look something very similar to this. With Amon-Ra St. Brown, of course, being number 1 in targets, Adonai Mitchell being the other player, with JMO on the boundary, having 2 players that run 4.3 sub 4.3 40-yard dashes on the boundary would be incredible for the Lions offense with their yak ability, their ability to separate down the field, and their ability to stretch defenses. It would make Amon-Ra St. Brown as well as Sam Laporta so much more effective over the middle and underneath stuff, because you have to have 2 safeties over the top. If you put Adonai Mitchell on one end and you put Jameson Williams on the other and you tell them to go run a route, the amount of cushion your offense is going to get, the amount of underneath stuff that is going to be allowed by the defense will make the offense for the Detroit Lions so incredibly smooth. And with all of those safeties backed off, guess what you're going to do? You're going to hand it to Jahmyr Gibbs. You're going to hand it to David Montgomery. And with a 2-high safety shell, they are not going to be able to step down and get to the running backs before Jahmyr Gibbs is at 5, 6, 7 yards. And with your quality of offensive line and Jahmyr Gibbs' explosiveness, they might not stop him at 6, 7, 8 yards either. So I do think that wide receiver not only would make the passing game more efficient, would make Amon-Ra St. Brown better, would make Sam Laporta better, would make the rushing attack better, but I think it would make the entire offense better. And for an offense that for the last 2 years has finished top 5 at their position in points scored, that says a lot, right? I think this is Brad Holmes' chance to rectify really the one and true only wrong he's ever done for this team, and that has been the inability to find the X wide receiver. It didn't work with Tyrell Williams. It didn't work with DJ Chark. It did not work with Marvin Jones, who was supposed to be the X last year. It will likely work with one of these wide receivers this year. He has addressed it every single offseason throughout free agency except for this one. Brad Holmes will draft an X wide receiver in this draft class. He will draft one early because it's something he very much values. And I do think it will be either Adonai Mitchell or Troy Franklin in the first round of the NFL draft. Could, again, potentially be somebody else, but those are the 2 players I think very much have a potential to be that guy. So with that being said, that's all I got for you guys right now. Let me know down in the comments below what you think about this potential draft, how you would feel about a wide receiver at 29, and potentially how you would attack the draft for the remainder of your picks if you select a wide receiver at 29. I'd be very curious what you guys have to say and what you guys think. But with all of that being said, that's all I got for you guys right now. Thank you all so much for watching, and until next time, and as always, go Lions.